I was always a dedicated woman. The kind who believes that love is built day by day, with patience, respect, and care. So when my husband made a cruel request before a dinner with his friends, something inside me began to change. I, who had always done everything to please him, found myself questioning what it truly meant to be respected in a relationship. What began as an ordinary night turned into a breaking point I could have never imagined. Veiled humiliations, calculated glances, and sharp words started to reveal a much larger truth behind the appearances. And little by little I began to pick up the pieces of who I was, until I discovered a strength I didn't even know I had. This isn't just a story about betrayal or disappointment. It's a journey of self-discovery, of quiet courage, and of emotional justice. Every step I took brought me closer to myself. Today I look back with pride at the woman I've become. Not for everything I lost, but for everything I learned. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I spent the day trying to make everything look perfect. I chose my dress carefully, reviewed recipes, and attended to every detail of the table setting as if it were a vitally important ritual. I wanted Matthew to feel proud, for his friends to see how welcoming and elegant our home was. It was silly perhaps, but I still believed that pleasing him was part of love. Deep down I just wanted to be noticed and maybe admired. As I was arranging the dishes, Matthew walked past me and cast a brief glance, evaluating everything like a stern inspector. Be careful not to overdo it, Stephanie. They like simple things. You don't need to look desperate. The sentence felt like a slap disguised as advice. I smiled, swallowing hard, trying not to let the growing discomfort in my chest show. What did he mean by that? I rushed to the mirror before the guests arrived. I checked my makeup, fixed my hair, and forced a smile that looked natural. Matthew appeared behind me in the reflection and murmured, "Don't embarrass me tonight, okay?" It made my blood run cold. I pretended not to hear, as if silence could erase the words. But they had already been etched into me. I took a deep breath and went downstairs, my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, that he didn't mean to be cruel. But something was different that night. The way he looked at me, the way he chose his words seemed rehearsed. Maybe I was exaggerating, maybe not. But something inside me was already starting to scream in silence. When he said, "Don't embarrass me," my heart froze. The doorbell rang promptly at 8. When I opened the door, I was met with calculated smiles and expensive perfumes. Matthew's friends came in as if they owned the place, occupying spaces with a naturalness that made me uncomfortable. I greeted each one politely, trying not to seem out of place. My role was to be the perfect hostess, but inside I felt like an intruder. During the first toasts I tried to smile, ask questions, and show genuine interest. But every answer came with a certain disdain, as if my words were too fragile to be taken seriously. One of them commented on a modern author, and when I mentioned my literary perspective, he interrupted me with a joke that made the others roar with laughter. I smiled too, not quite sure what they were laughing at. Matthew, instead of defending or including me, just watched. From time to time, he would cast glances that seemed more like warnings than support. I looked for points of connection, trying hard not to seem out of place, but it was like trying to fit into a puzzle where my piece simply didn't belong. With each new attempt, I felt my self-esteem crumble a little more. I went to the kitchen several times, not just to serve but to breathe. There, away from their eyes, I could recompose my smile before returning. There was something humiliating about needing to hide to endure a night, but I still wanted to believe that if I held on, he would notice my effort. Maybe he would be proud of me. Every laugh from them felt like a judgment against me. During dessert, the atmosphere seemed more relaxed, but also crueler. Matthew's friends were joking among themselves, and he joined in enthusiastically. Amid the jokes, someone commented on women who are hard to please. Matthew laughed loudly and, gesturing toward me with his eyes, said, "Stephanie is different. She just needs constant approval, otherwise she falls apart." The whole table burst into laughter. I was paralyzed. It wasn't just the sentence but the tone, the intention. He exposed me as if I were an insecure, fragile, almost ridiculous caricature. My face grew hot, and I felt my eyes well up with tears. I laughed discreetly, pretending not to care, but inside something was breaking. The humiliation wasn't just in the words, but in the complete lack of care for my feelings. I tried to find support in someone's eyes, but everyone seemed complicit in the moment. Their laughter sounded like a chorus of contempt. For a moment I wanted to get up and leave, but I didn't want to give him that power. I remained seated, holding on to a fragile dignity, like porcelain about to crack. The taste of the sweet dessert mixed with the bitterness of shame. Matthew continued talking as if nothing had happened. Perhaps for him it really meant nothing. Maybe he was so used to belittling me that he didn't even notice anymore. Or maybe he did notice and enjoyed the feeling of superiority it gave him. I didn't know which possibility hurt more. I smiled to keep from crying, but inside something had broken. In the days following the dinner, Matthew's words wouldn't leave my mind. "Don't embarrass me." I repeated those words like a bitter echo that invaded every thought, every gesture. They appeared in the mirror as I did my makeup for work, in the silence of the car, even in the middle of the classes I tried to teach with a light heart. It was as if suddenly everything about me was subject to judgment. I began to question if I had overreacted, if maybe he was just nervous about the dinner. But the tone he used, the cold and precise look in his eyes, revealed more than just an unfortunate comment. It was as if, little by little, I had been reduced to a figure that needed to be managed, contained, hidden. This eroded what little confidence I had left. I never thought I would one day feel like a stranger in my own marriage. For so long I had clung to the idea that love and respect went hand in hand. And now, confronted with these small daily wounds, I was beginning to doubt if we had ever truly been partners. Was I blind, or did he always know how to hide who he was? I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the sparkle in my eyes that I once had. I was there, surviving but not living. And all for what? For loving someone who seemed to be ashamed of my presence. Why would he say that if he truly loved me? The following week I met Rebecca for coffee. She looked at me with concern before I even said anything. "You look exhausted, Steph." I wanted to smile and pretend everything was fine, but my words came out as a restrained outburst. I told her about the dinner, about Matthew's comment, and she listened in silence, like someone who had been expecting this for a long time. Her eyes said more than her mouth. "There's something you need to know," she said, stirring her coffee as if delaying the inevitable. "Anthony. He told me that, among his friends, Matthew often refers to you as a burden." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. A burden. As if I were a weight he carried out of obligation. Rebecca tried to soften the blow, but it was too late. It was already seared into me. I drove home in silence, the phrase hammering in my head. All the little jokes, the impatient glances, the public corrections now made sense. They weren't isolated flaws. They were part of a deliberate construction. I wasn't a wife in his eyes. I was an inconvenience that needed to be managed. The pain was immediate, but then came something even more unsettling: doubt. How long had he thought this way? From the beginning? Or did I become this burden over the years? Suddenly I realized that the dinner was just the tip of the iceberg. I cried in the car, in the bathroom, and silently at night while he slept beside me, oblivious to the damage he was causing. But for the first time amidst the tears I felt something different. A discomfort that grew like a seed of indignation. I was hurt, yes, but I was also starting to feel angry. Not just at him, but at myself for having stayed silent for so long. The truth was, I had been shrinking for years, trying to be the ideal wife, erasing parts of my essence to fit into the invisible demands he imposed. Maybe I had accepted too much, forgiven too much, and lost myself in the process. But now, something inside me refused to keep pretending everything was fine. Rebecca hugged me when I told her how I felt. She didn't say it would pass. She said I needed to look at myself with more compassion. And in that moment, even still enveloped in pain, I realized I deserved more. I deserved respect. And above all, I deserved to find myself again. If Matthew couldn't see my worth, he was the one who was blind. I went home, and for the first time in a long time I walked with a steady gait. The hurt still ached, but it no longer paralyzed me. I was wounded but not broken. I made a decision. I would no longer be invisible. It was a Saturday morning when Anthony showed up at the school where I worked. At first I found it strange. It wasn't common for us to speak without Matthew present. He greeted me kindly and asked if we could talk for a bit. There was something in his voice that seemed hesitant, as if he were carrying a weight he needed to share. I agreed, though I was suspicious. We went to a quiet coffee shop on the corner. He was restless, fiddling with his cup without taking a sip. "Stephanie," he began, "I know it's none of my business, but there's something that's been bothering me for a while." His tone was respectful but filled with tension. I just looked at him, waiting for him to say what seemed so difficult. When he mentioned Matthew, my stomach turned. Anthony didn't hide his discomfort. He talked about the dinner, about how he saw Matthew treat me with coldness and contempt. "You didn't deserve that," he said seriously. "It was humiliating." I thanked him, not knowing exactly how to react. It was strange to hear someone from his circle acknowledge what I was just beginning to accept as real. Maybe I wasn't as crazy as I thought. Even without saying everything at once, I realized Anthony knew more. He was there for a bigger reason. And for the first time, I felt that someone saw what I was feeling inside. There was something in his eyes that said more than his words. After a long silence, Anthony looked at me with a mix of guilt and compassion. "There's something you need to know," he said softly, as if he feared the words would gain power by being spoken aloud. I braced myself for the worst, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "Matthew is involved with another woman. It's been going on for some time." I was in shock. I couldn't process it immediately. I felt the air vanish from the room, as if everything had stopped. "He met her at a company event," Anthony continued. "She's much younger, and he doesn't bother hiding it from his close friends." My heart raced, my hands trembled. It was real. The betrayal I never wanted to imagine was right there, naked and cruel. I didn't cry. Not in that moment. There was something stronger than the pain. It was a feeling that everything finally made sense. The criticism, the distance, the absences justified with vague excuses. He had shifted the blame to me to justify his own cowardly choice. And worse, he was counting on the silence of others to keep it all a secret. Anthony looked sorrowful. "You don't deserve this." I nodded, swallowing the pain with difficulty. But right there, something inside me hardened. And there was no turning back. My world fell apart, but my silence became my armor. I drove home in silence, my eyes fixed on the car window as if it could offer me an answer. Matthew was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, as if nothing had happened. And perhaps for him, nothing was wrong. I felt the urge to scream, to confront him right then and there. But I took a deep breath and held back. I wouldn't be impulsive. I wouldn't hand him my pain on a silver platter. In the following days, I began to watch him with new eyes. His comings and goings, his forced smiles, the messages he hid. There was no more naivety in me, only a calm forged in the wound. I took mental notes of every strange behavior, every lie disguised as routine. From that moment on, I wanted proof. I wanted him to drown in his own web. Rebecca was the only one I told. She encouraged me to be strategic, not to waste what could be a turning point. I didn't want revenge, I wanted justice. And above all, I wanted to rise up with dignity. If he played with lies, I would use the truth as my most powerful weapon. But first, I needed to see clearly the size of the abyss. I started living like an actress in my own home. He smiled and I smiled back. But inside, my heart was already different. Firmer. More awake. If he had a game, I would learn to play too. What was once indifference turned into something crueler. Matthew began to treat me with a coldness that hurt more than any words. He avoided eye contact, answered in monosyllables, and only spoke to me when necessary, and always with a tone of veiled impatience. The house, once filled with small daily conversations, now felt like a minefield of uncomfortable silences. I noticed how he made a point of not including me in his plans, as if I were an inconvenient detail. He would mention business dinners without even telling me. Sometimes, he would be smiling on the phone and upon noticing my presence, immediately change his tone. It was as if he blamed me for something, or simply no longer wanted to maintain the appearance of a devoted husband. The displays of contempt were in the small gestures. He no longer held the door for me, didn't ask how my day was, and even turned his face away when I came near. It was hard to admit, but that man was no longer my partner. Or perhaps he never had been, and was only now showing his true face. A cold, judgmental gaze had replaced everything that was once affection. Little by little, I began to understand. He no longer wanted to hide what he felt for me, and that hurt more than any betrayal. His eyes no longer held love, only calculation. Rebecca noticed my sadness before I even confessed. One afternoon in the park, I poured everything out. She listened attentively and, as always, didn't try to comfort me with empty words. "You need to protect yourself, Steph. You can't keep waiting for him to change." Her words came with the firmness of someone who had lived through similar pains and survived. There, among the fallen leaves and cold wind, she planted a new seed in me. Start documenting everything. Dates, messages, behaviors. Everything could be important in the future. That scared me at first. But as she explained, I realized it wasn't about revenge, it was about self-preservation. It was about not letting him distort reality, as he had been doing with calculated words and gestures. I went home with a notebook hidden in my purse. That night, while he slept, I wrote down what I remembered from the last few days. It was strange to turn my routine into evidence, but at the same time, it gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. Rebecca promised to help me. She said that if I fell, she would be there to catch me. In that moment, something inside me changed. I was no longer alone in the dark. There was a faint light pointing the way. Her words sounded like a breath of courage. At school, I started receiving different looks. Colleagues who had barely noticed my presence before now seemed more attentive, kinder. Laura, a new teacher I hardly knew, approached me carefully. "If you need anything, I'm here," she said, almost as if she knew more than she was letting on. I thanked her with a shy smile, but that sentence echoed in my mind for days. Maybe I wasn't so invisible after all. Rebecca also stayed close, always with messages, invitations, and encouragement. Her constant presence reminded me that there were still true bonds in my life. She made me laugh, even when I thought I had forgotten how. Her quiet strength was a daily reminder that pain didn't have to isolate me. It could, little by little, reconnect me. Even Andrew, my son, began to notice the atmosphere at home. Although he didn't say anything directly, his worried glances told me everything. He was watching, feeling the changes, and seemed to be trying to protect me in silence. That touched me deeply, but it also made me want to spare him. I needed to be strong for him and for myself. I started to realize that, even in the shadows, there were hands reaching out to me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone. Maybe there were more people rooting for me than I thought. Laura entered the teacher's lounge with a different expression that morning. She pulled me aside, with a tone of urgency she had never used before. "Stephanie, I think I've discovered something serious. And it involves your husband." My heart sped up and a chill ran down my spine. I sat down, trying to contain my panic, as she opened her laptop and showed me some documents. With her experience in academic management, Laura had access to an internal database at the university where Matthew occasionally gave lectures. His name appeared with titles that, according to her, didn't exist in the official records. I checked with 2 institutions. Neither of them has any record of the degree he claims to have. I was in shock. How could someone fake something like that for so long? It started to sink in slowly. The trips, the invitations to events, the prestige among his colleagues, all based on a well-constructed lie. The man who demanded composure, ethics, good appearance, and social standing from me was, in fact, someone who had lied about his most fundamental basis, his education. I felt ashamed for him, but even more for myself, for not having noticed sooner. It was like looking into a broken mirror and realizing that the image he sold me was just a reflection of an illusion. The man who demanded perfection from me was a fraud. That same night, I pretended to be tired and went to bed early. I waited for Matthew to turn off the bedroom lights, and with my heart pounding, I got up silently. I went into his office where he kept old folders and papers. Everything seemed too organized, as if he wanted to project the image of someone meticulous, but that only made the lie more glaring. I began to search carefully. I found copies of diplomas in elegant frames, with seals that looked too generic to be authentic. I took out my phone and photographed everything one by one. Then I found emails exchanged with suspicious contacts, talking about resume adjustments and supplemental documentation that sounded more like codes than legitimate professional communication. In the following days, I continued the search. Laura helped me validate the data, comparing records and checking information with her network of contacts. With each confirmation that it was a fraud, my stomach turned. But along with the pain, a sense of justice grew. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for everyone who had been deceived, and also for my son who deserved the truth. I kept everything on a flash drive hidden inside a book on my bedroom shelf. That wasn't just evidence. It was the beginning of my liberation. Each page revealed the lie he leaned on. The temptation to confront him immediately was strong. There were moments when I would look at him with contempt and almost let slip everything I knew. But taking a deep breath, I remembered what was at stake. It wasn't the time for outbursts. It was time for strategy. I needed a moment when everything was against him, not me. And I was beginning to understand how to play this game with cold precision. I carefully stored the evidence, updating the files as new discoveries emerged. Laura and Rebecca were my only confidants, and with them I made silent plans. My trust in them gave me security. If something happened, at least I wouldn't be alone. And now, with Anthony still on my side, I felt that the net was slowly closing in. Matthew continued his routine, unsuspecting. He was still arrogant, still looked at me as if he were superior. But there was something different in my eyes now. He just didn't notice it. It was no longer submission or sadness. It was focus. It was resistance. It was the beginning of something bigger than he could ever imagine coming from me. I would wait. Not out of fear, but out of intelligence. When the blow came, it would be precise. No screams. Just truths. When the mask fell, there would be no way to glue it back on. Andrew was always observant, even when he pretended to be distracted. Lately, he had been watching me more closely, as if trying to assemble a silent puzzle. I avoided showing sadness around him, but it was impossible to hide what was overflowing from my eyes and gestures. And he, my sensitive and attentive son, noticed. One day after dinner, he approached me with a serious look. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, with that sweet voice of someone who knows the answer will be a lie. I nodded, trying to smile, but he insisted. "Dad is different. He talks to you like you don't matter." That broke my heart. My instinct was to protect him, to hide the pain, but I knew he already saw more than I wanted him to. I hugged him in silence, feeling my heart ache. In the following days, Andrew started helping me more, seeking my company, as if trying to compensate for the void his father left. One night, upon hearing a muffled argument between me and Matthew, he appeared at the doorway and just looked at me. Not with fear, but with indignation. He was growing up, maturing with a pain that no child should have to carry. And then, in a whisper that cut through the air in the room, he asked me with teary eyes, "Mom, what is he hiding? Mom, what is he hiding?" The next morning began with a strange silence. Matthew was having coffee as if nothing had happened, ignoring my presence and Andrew's. But something was different. The boy sat at the table and, with firmness, looked his father in the eye. "Can we talk?" he asked. Matthew looked up impatiently, as if dealing with a petulant child, but he agreed. The conversation took place in the office. I remained in the kitchen, my heart racing. I didn't hear the exact words, but I could feel the tension building behind the door. Voices were raised, first Matthew's, then Andrew's, firm but not aggressive. When he left the room, he walked over to me without saying a word. He just hugged me. His eyes were red, but full of determination. "Mom, I don't know everything yet, but I know he's lying. And I believe you." That disarmed me inside. It was no longer just my son comforting me, it was him taking a stand. Andrew, at only 18, was doing what many adults wouldn't have the courage to do, choosing the truth even if it came with pain. He didn't ask for explanations. He just stood by my side, with that firm and loving presence that gave me new strength. In that instant, I knew something had changed. He was no longer just a boy observing, he was a conscious ally. He said, "I believe you, not him." From that day on, my posture changed. Something inside me solidified, as if Andrew's presence had stitched together the parts of me that were still fragile. I no longer walked around the house afraid of Matthew's glares. Now he was the one who seemed suspicious, as if he could feel the change in the air. I didn't pretend anymore. I just observed in silence with serenity. Andrew became my anchor. He would bring me small flowers when he came home from school, say he loved me before bed, and insist on doing things together like in the old days. Those simple moments became my refuge. Even when the world seemed to be falling apart, all I had to do was look at him to remember why I needed to keep going. Rebecca noticed the difference. "You're stronger," she commented. And it was true. Not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer defined me. I still had difficult nights, still felt the weight of the lies, but now I also felt something new, hope. And that hope had a name, a hug, a look. It was my son. I knew that bigger battles were still to come. But now, with Andrew by my side, I felt capable of facing them. For the first time in a long time, I felt that love truly strengthened me. Now I was no longer alone. The news of Paul's arrival caught me by surprise. He and Matthew rarely spoke, and there had always been a thick silence between them. Paul had moved away years ago and kept his distance from the family, as if he wanted to protect himself from something that even I didn't understand at the time. But now he was back, and Matthew didn't seem at all enthusiastic about it. "He's just here to cause trouble," he said dismissively. I was apprehensive about seeing him again. I didn't know what to expect. The last time I saw him was at a distant Christmas, where he spent more time alone on the porch than with the guests. But when I opened the door and saw him there, with the same calm and serious expression as always, I felt an unexpected peace. His hug was brief but sincere, and there was something in his eyes that seemed attentive. During Sunday lunch, I noticed how he observed everything. Matthew's comments, the silences, the cutting glances. Paul didn't say much, but his eyes told me he noticed more than he let on. I wasn't sure whose side he was on, but something told me he wasn't there just because he missed his family. And then I realized he saw, and he didn't seem willing to pretend everything was fine. He didn't seem willing to pretend that nothing was happening. In the following days, Paul began to make his presence felt more often. Sometimes he would stop by for coffee. Other times he would just show up unannounced, saying he was just passing through. But it was clear there was a greater purpose. Each visit seemed like a test, a discreet observation of the routine that Matthew and I shared. And with each encounter, Paul became more attentive to his brother's behavior. During a conversation on the porch, he commented bluntly, "Matthew has always had this habit of controlling everything around him, but now, it seems crueler than before." I looked at him in silence, surprised by his frankness. "You don't deserve this, Stephanie," he added. His words moved me. For the first time, someone from his family acknowledged my pain without minimizing or justifying it. Matthew, noticing their growing closeness, started to act more impatiently. He even complained that his brother was taking sides. But Paul just laughed. "Maybe I'm just opening my eyes," he replied in a calm tone, which irritated Matthew even more. I confess that gave me a silent sense of relief. I was no longer isolated within the walls of that house. Paul wasn't expressive, nor one for grand declarations. But in every gesture I saw a clear stance, and he was on my side. For the first time I heard someone from his family defend me. Without us needing to say it out loud, an alliance began to form between me and Paul. Our gazes would meet with a sense of complicity, especially when Matthew let slip another acidic comment or displayed his false superiority. Paul would ask me subtle questions, wanting to understand what was happening behind what he already sensed. I answered carefully, still hesitant, but I no longer had to hide so much. We started exchanging discreet messages. He wanted to know more about the documents, about the rumors he had heard from Matthew's old colleagues. When I mentioned the evidence of academic fraud, he wasn't surprised. "I always thought there was something wrong with the way he promoted himself," he said. And then he offered to help validate the information with his contacts in the field. I accepted without hesitation. It was comforting to have someone like him around. Someone who, despite sharing the same blood, chose to see the truth. Paul was balanced, thoughtful, and his support wasn't driven by anger, but by justice. He didn't want to bring down his brother for revenge. He wanted the masks to fall, and for me to stop being the only one carrying the shame of a fake marriage. And so, silently, the net began to close in. Matthew still thought he was in control, but not for much longer. The wall around him was beginning to crack. The afternoons with Laura became quiet but purposeful meetings. We would sit in her office, away from Matthew's eyes, to organize everything we had discovered. Forged documents, suspicious emails, inconsistencies in the dates on his diplomas. Each piece fit into a frighteningly clear puzzle. This wasn't just a lie. It was fraud. A sham sustained by arrogance and silence. Laura, methodical as always, created a detailed dossier with each piece of evidence cataloged. We made physical and digital copies, stored in separate locations. She also contacted colleagues in the legal and academic fields, who offered to testify if necessary. "This is more serious than I thought," she said, analyzing one of the documents. "He didn't just deceive you, Stephanie. He deceived entire institutions." With each new confirmation, I wavered between relief and outrage. It was painful to see on paper everything I had already suspected in my heart. But it was also liberating. For the first time, it was no longer his word against mine. I had facts. And facts, unlike his promises, do not lie. I placed the dossier inside a black folder. I looked at it for a few seconds and felt a shiver. This was more than just paper. Each sheet was a verdict against him. That week, Paul called me for a private conversation. He was more serious than usual. I remembered an ex-partner of Matthew's, from when he tried to start that consulting firm. "Do you remember?" I nodded, my heart tightening. "He left the business after discovering that Matthew had forged letters of recommendation. And now he's willing to talk." My whole body froze for a moment. It was the missing piece. Paul handed me a recording in which the ex-partner recounted details of the scheme, including names, dates, and emails exchanged at the time. It was clear, precise, and could be used as concrete proof. "He has documents too," Paul said. "He's willing to hand them over, as long as it's clear that he was also deceived." I took a deep breath. This changed everything. Now Matthew's downfall wouldn't just be moral, it would be public. Calmly, we transferred the files to the same dossier Laura and I had been assembling. The evidence was now complete. Academic fraud, professional manipulation, and now an attempt to build a career on others' lies. It was like watching a house of cards about to collapse with a single breath. And I held that breath in my hands. Paul held my hand firmly. "The time is coming, Stephanie. He's going to reap what he sowed." The web he wove was about to entangle him. As I watched Matthew parade his confidence around the house, with his impeccable suit and rehearsed smile, I knew the moment had arrived. He enthusiastically mentioned the dinner he was planning with his friends. "To celebrate a new phase," he said. I laughed inwardly. Little did he know that the celebration would be of a different nature. I just agreed with everything, acting supportive as I had so many times before. I spent the next few days reviewing the dossier, adjusting what was necessary. Laura and Paul helped me with the details. The venue would be the same as the first wound, our home. The same faces that once laughed at my pain would now see who was truly a cause for shame. And I wouldn't make a scene. I would just present the facts. I would let the truth speak for me. Rebecca suggested I record the dinner. "At least the moment of the reveal," she said. "You need to document this. For your safety." I agreed. There was no more room for improvisation. Everything had to be calculated, precise, definitive. I no longer trembled as before. Now my strength came from the calm before the storm. I looked in the mirror before bed and saw a different person. Still hurt, yes. But ready. The shame he feared would finally be his. It would be the night that shame changed owners. The living room was immaculate. The table was set with the same care as before, the wines chosen by him, the lighting soft. Matthew was radiant, as if that night were another celebration of his personal success. His friends arrived one by one, laughing loudly, exchanging compliments, repeating the same jokes I had heard 1,000 times. And he, at the center of it all, like a conductor leading his own orchestra. I remained silent, observing from a distance but without hiding. My dress was simple yet elegant. My posture firm. I greeted everyone lightly, without exaggeration. I was there not as a supporting character, but as someone who knew exactly what she was going to do. Matthew had no suspicion. His confidence was so great that he didn't even notice my new presence. He looked at me as he always did, as if he controlled me. As they toasted the new chapter Matthew claimed to be starting, I just smiled. The moment wasn't right yet, but it was approaching with surgical precision. His pride was overflowing, blinding him. Every phrase, every gesture was more proof that he still saw himself in control. He didn't realize that this night was the last one where he would call the shots. And it was on this stage of appearances that I decided to end the show. He thought he still had control. I waited until the dinner reached the point where everyone was relaxed. Laughter, cross-conversations, clinking glasses. Then I stood up calmly, picking up the folder I had carefully placed on the sideboard. "Before dessert, I'd like to share something," I announced, my voice firm and serene. Everyone looked at me with curiosity, including Matthew, who raised an eyebrow, confused. I took a deep breath and began. For a long time, people asked me why I seemed so withdrawn. The truth is, I was silenced by lies, by humiliation, by manipulation. I started opening the documents, distributing copies as I spoke. The man you are applauding tonight built his career on fake diplomas, academic lies, and silent betrayals. Here is the proof. Hands began to stop moving. Smiles froze. I presented the recordings, the emails, the forged documents. Each sheet was a stab at the image he had cultivated. Matthew tried to interrupt, but I continued. And as if that weren't enough, he maintained a relationship with another woman for months, while making me believe that I was the problem. My voice didn't waver. It was pain transformed into justice. In that instant, the dinner was no longer his. It was mine. And the truth was my most powerful ally. The laughter ceased, and the silence was the verdict. Matthew jumped to his feet, trying to deny everything. "This is a setup. You all know my integrity." His voice echoed through the room, a mix of anger and desperation. But the faces around him had changed. The once complicit gazes now avoided his. One by one, his friends looked through the papers, whispered among themselves, and slowly distanced themselves from the center of the scene. The air was heavy, and he was finally feeling it. I tried not to look away, even when he glared at me with restrained hatred. For the first time, he was the target of judgment. Not because of a rumor, but because of undeniable proof. The laughter that used to accompany him was now absent. The prestige, the confidence, the poise. It all crumbled before a truth he never expected to face publicly. Anthony was the first to leave the room, without a word. Then, two colleagues from work who had always flattered him stood up, without even touching their dessert. Rebecca watched it all with teary eyes but smiling with pride. Paul stood firm by my side, like a silent guardian of the justice that was finally being served. When Matthew realized he was alone, he tried to accuse me of betrayal. But there was no audience left to hear him. The man who feared shame was drowning in it in front of everyone. After that night, the house was silent for days. Matthew left the next day, taking only a few suitcases and the weight of his own downfall. Andrew and I sat in the empty living room, with no music, no television, just feeling the emptiness that, strangely, sounded like freedom. For the first time in a long time, his absence was light. It was a breath of fresh air. In the following months, we began to reorganize our routine. We took old photos off the walls, rearranged the furniture, and painted Andrew's room together. Each small change was symbolic, a sign that we were rebuilding not just the house but ourselves. He helped me with everything, and I saw a new kind of peace in his eyes. The conversations returned. The laughter too. There were difficult days, yes, but now we faced them together without fear. There were no more shouts echoing through the halls, no more cold stares at breakfast. The silence was different, it was calm. And the love between a mother and son flourished again, stronger, more authentic. We walked through the house like one walks through a home, not a trap. Our home was now made of peace, not fear. It was on a sunny afternoon that Rebecca suggested, "What if you used everything you've been through to help other women?" The idea caught me by surprise, but it soon made sense. Together with Laura, we began to sketch out an educational project aimed at women who have suffered emotional and psychological abuse. A space for support, training, and autonomy. A new beginning not just for me but for many. The two of them became pillars in this process. Laura handled the academic side, while Rebecca brought her experience with local NGOs. I, in turn, shared my story with a group of women for the first time, with a firm voice without shame. Some cried, others smiled. And there I realized that my pain was no longer just mine. We created workshops, literary meetings, and listening spaces. Every woman who sought us out carried a piece of me, and each of their steps healed me a little more. It was as if, by lifting others, I was rebuilding my own foundations. The pain still existed, but it had been given new meaning. It became a seed for something greater. And seeing those lives transform, I understood that I had found my new purpose. My pain was turning into hope for others. The days passed with a lightness I had forgotten existed. Walking through the streets without feeling judged. Waking up without the weight of a silent war. Smiling without fear of being corrected. Everything was new. I looked back a few times, of course, but now without anger, without guilt. Only with the certainty that I had survived. And more than that, I was reborn. Andrew followed his plans, with a sparkle in his eyes that made me believe in the future. I watched him from a distance, proud, knowing that my fight was also for him. The project with Rebecca and Laura grew, touching lives, opening doors. And I finally had found my own voice. No longer echoing the opinions of others, but firm, conscious, and free. I started writing again. Not as a teacher, but as a woman. I recorded my memories, my feelings, my journey. It was a diary, perhaps a book. Or maybe just the way I found to keep alive the memory that everything passes, including pain. And that the truth, when it comes, can liberate more than it hurts. I looked up at the sky that afternoon and smiled. It wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. It wasn't he who embarrassed me. It was I who showed him the weight of the truth. The auditorium was simple but welcoming. Young people of various ages filled the chairs with curiosity and anticipation. I was invited to speak about courage, and I brought with me more than words. I brought healed scars and lived lessons. I stepped onto the stage with a calm heart. There was no more fear. The woman who would speak there was no longer the one who hid behind fragile smiles. She was someone who had been reborn. I began by telling them who I once was. A woman who believed in love above all else, who tried to please, who was silenced by words disguised as care. Eyes widened, some heads nodded. I spoke of the wounds, the discoveries, the silent nights, and the days I thought about giving up. But I also spoke of the strength I found where I least expected it. Within myself, in my son's hug, in the outstretched hands I didn't ask for but received. I told them how I used pain as a seed. How what was destruction became reconstruction. And how even through tears I found a way. I spoke with firmness but without anger. With truth but without weight. At the end, a young woman raised her hand and asked, "Did you forgive him?" I took a deep breath and answered, "I forgave myself for taking so long to love myself." Seeing those attentive eyes, I realized that my pain had become an inspiration. The shame was never mine, and it never will be again. Now, I'm curious about you who have listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever gone through something similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the end screen that you will also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.